Hey there, everybody. It's your friend, your ally, the ever-loving Levite Lost, coming at you once again. This time I'm going to talk about the Space Trilogy, written by C.S. Lewis. It has the three books, Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. Now, starting with Out of the Silent Planet. It's a much thinner book than the rest of them. And if I remember correctly, this one started out because C.S. Lewis and his friend J.R.R. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, they decided that they were both going to write science fiction stories. So C.S. Lewis wrote Out of the Silent Planet, and James Tolkien started out writing a science fiction story, which he never ended up finishing. And I really like this one a lot because it is so short. It's really easy to read and get through. It's less of a strictly narrative tale. It's more of just an exercise in world building, so that C.S. Lewis can take us to this whole other world and give us kind of a slice of life of the cultures that live there and the different kinds of creatures and everything. It's much more in line with the old pulp adventures novels and stuff of the 1940s. I really like this one. I suggest checking it out. It's a really good book. The next one, Paralandra, and this one's a bit different. People claim that this one's an allegory of the Garden of Eden, though C.S. Lewis himself has denied that fact. But when you get to reading, it's fairly obvious that he took great inspiration from the Garden of Eden and that tale from the book of Genesis. It's very, very clear that's what's going on here. It's not strictly allegory, but it's more of just C.S. Lewis working over in his mind the themes that the tale of the Garden of Eden brings up, and working through those themes and his ideas and his thoughts on them. Still, it's a pretty good book. This one's more fantasy instead of science fiction, even though it uses science fiction means in order to kick off the story. It's a direct sequel to Out of the Silent Planet. And I really like this one. There's a neat little cameo, sort of, by C.S. Lewis in the beginning of the book. He writes himself in as a friend of the main character, which is pretty neat. It's always interesting when an author kind of puts himself in a book without being the main character in the book. And the last one is That Hideous Strength. Now this one is the absolute biggest of them. I mean, it's pretty much the same size as both first books combined. But still, I'd recommend this one. People compare this one to George Orwell's 1984, and they have similar themes about a totalitarian regime that's in 1984. It's already taken over. In this one, it's beginning to take over. It's themes like good versus evil, life versus death, that sort of thing. It is a fantasy. It's got fantasy elements in it. C.S. Lewis starts off in his introduction to this book, calling it a fairy tale, which I can see. His deal with calling it a fairy tale is because the first two chapters do start off very slow. There's not a whole lot of the actual meat of the story you would start reading this for in those first two chapters. Is just mostly set up of the characters and their situations. You know, it's like starting off a fairy tale about a woodcutter or something. That's his illustration. At some points, this one's hard to get through. It is just a very big, dense book. There's a lot going on. Ties back to Arthurian legends and all that sort of thing. Very, very close ties to Arthurian legends the farther into the book you get. And it makes allusions to the Numenor, and a couple of other different things that you find in Lord of the Rings are explicitly mentioned in this book. And that's in the introduction itself. C.S. Lewis says, if you want to find out more about Numenor and the Men of the West and all this sort of things, you would have to find what is, at this point, was just a manuscript that James Tolkien had. Lord of the Rings hadn't even been published at this point. So I think that's really interesting that Lewis was kind of pointing at his friend's work, even though it wasn't out yet. He's saying, hey, you're going to like this. Anyways, I suggest reading this one as well. The whole trilogy is just really good. You don't have to read them in order, any particular order. I would suggest reading them all, but if you just pick up one, like the first one or second or third one, any of them, you'll probably enjoy it. They can all be enjoyed for different reasons. Thematically, they're not really all that similar. between the books. Like this one's an adventure story. This one's a bit of a what if history, sort of, a bit of morality tale. This one's a cautionary tale about power and how it corrupts. But I suggest reading them all. They're all really good. But that's all I gotta say about that. I'll talk to you next time here on Levite Lost.